Well, good afternoon. It is the 19th day of April 2021. And today I was going to speak about the NCIS, but I'm not. I'll get to them later. This is more interesting, more topical. As you're probably aware, recently, unless you've been under a rock or wisely don't watch the news, there's been a lot of news lately about police use of force, about the prosecution of police who are alleged to have used excessive force. And it may seem to a lot of people, and I think not unjustifiably, that a lot of these prosecutions, which are state and local, there's often a rush to judgment. In fact, charges are often filed. Officers are often fired before an investigation could even be begun, much less completed. So there may not even be a single investigative report. And I think we've seen that in a couple of cases where mayors have stepped in and even fired police chiefs and the officer involved, and they filed criminal charges on officers. And again, there hasn't been investigation one into that. Now, the purpose of this video, again, this is about federal law enforcement. How does the federal government handle shootings versus state and local agencies? Well, first, to answer how state and local agencies investigate shootings and how they handle them, the answer is it depends, okay? It depends on what agency you belong to, okay? Some have more protections than others, but all of them are subject to district attorneys and state attorneys who are usually politically, they're usually elected officials, okay? So they're accountable to the electorate, and if they perceive, I think, political gain or political threat, they're much more likely to file charges. That's not to say all the charges that they file are unjustified or that all police shootings are justified. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that, they tend to be very, very responsive. Well, how does the federal government handle shootings? Okay, what is the federal law with regards to the use of deadly force? What is sovereign immunity? What is the supremacy clause? What happens when a state and local prosecutor in a highly charged case wants to charge a federal agent with a crime? This is all very topical. And again, this morning I just read an article that said a tale of two shootings. And the article was about the comparison of the shooting of, I think his name was Duante Wright, in Minneapolis by a police officer, female officer, who mistook her taser for her gun. But actually it probably was a justified shooting, even if she had used her firearm. But I'm not going to get into that right at this minute. But she was not only fired but charged with manslaughter. And then the case of the shooting of Ashley Babbitt, who was coming into the Capitol. And of course, the writers lamenting that we don't know the identity of the officer, we don't know the race of the officer, and we don't have any access to the police reports. All we know is that the Department of Justice has found her shooting justified. Ashley Babbitt was coming into the Capitol building on January 6th, and a Capitol police officer fired a round, killing her. And again, my point is not to argue that that was a good shooting. Actually, I don't think it was a good shooting. Number one, it wasn't safe because you had officers from your department standing right behind her, so that doesn't make it safe. And number two, you can always go up and hit somebody in the face, and you don't have to kill them if they're coming into a door. Okay, you can use deadly force under certain circumstances, but the shooter was found by the Department of Justice to have acted reasonably. So what we're going to do is look at this, look at these factors. Number one, what is the Department of Justice's rules and law with regards to the use of deadly force? Number two, how do federal agencies investigate shootings? Number three, what is the supremacy clause? Number four, what are some famous cases where state and local prosecutors have tried to intervene and prosecute federal officers but have been unsuccessful? And number five, what are some problem areas that every federal agent has to be concerned with? It mostly involves off-duty stuff. Okay, so let's look at that. Again, this is important for anyone going into federal law enforcement because one of the reasons you might be going is, perceived lack of support by your managers in state and local. So let's take a look at this. All right, this is taken from the Department of Justice policy on the use of deadly force. And I had to take it and print it out on a separate sheet simply because the font just didn't transfer to the software. But here you go. Permissible uses. Law enforcement officers and correctional officers of the Department of Justice, but this applies to all federal, may use deadly force only when necessary. That is, when the officer or agent has a reasonable belief that the subject of such force poses an imminent danger of death or serious physical injury to the officer or to another person. And then with regards to fleeing felons, deadly force may be used to prevent the escape of a fleeing subject if there's probable cause to believe, number one, the subject has committed a felony involving the infliction of or threatened infliction of serious physical injury or death, and two things, not one, the escape of the subject would pose an imminent danger of death or serious physical injury to the officer or another person. Now, the key word here is imminent. Okay? Imminent usually means that the person has the ability, the opportunity, and you're in jeopardy, AOJ. In other words, if I'm carrying a weapon and I have it in my hands, I have the ability and opportunity to hurt you, and if I point it at you, you're in jeopardy. But is that what this means here? And the answer is, surprisingly, no. The Department of Justice changed the meaning of the word imminent to fit this case. So what does imminent mean in this policy, and as will govern law enforcement, federal law enforcement officers? Good question. And this is really key to this policy. As used in this policy, imminent has a broader meaning than immediate or instantaneous. The concept of imminent should be understood to be elastic, that is, involving a period of time dependent on the circumstances, rather than the fixed point in time implicit in the concept of immediate or instantaneous. Thus, a subject may pose an imminent danger, even if he or she is not at that very moment pointing a weapon at the officer. If, for example, he or she has a weapon within reach, or is running for cover carrying a weapon, or running to a place where the officer has reason to believe a weapon is available. Very important, you know. For instance, if a person is going back into a car, a felony subject, you know, cars, drugs, weapons go together, and cars contain weapons often, and vehicles are weapons, as we will see. So again, this has a huge impact on this word imminent, on deadly force policy. And it's important to anyone going into law enforcement that you know what the ground rules are. And first we're going to look at a DEA shooting, very recent, just last week, and how the media reported it and why they reported it that way. So let's take a look at that.
Captures a shooting involving a DEA agent who says a man approached him with a gun.
Now, the family of the man who was shot insists that he did not point a weapon at the undercover agent. Kevin Freeman is live in the newsroom tonight. And Kevin, does this video clarify exactly what happened here?
Well, Tracy and Lou, not really. The video was taken from a Cleveland School District building that's across the street from where that encounter took place. Now, it is close enough to show us what happened, but not in a lot of great detail. The surveillance camera shows the intersection of East 82nd Street and Decker Avenue. It's mounted on the East Professional Center. That's the former East High School. As you see in the upper left of the screen, you see a white SUV sitting on East 82nd. We later learned that's where an undercover DEA agent is conducting a narcotics investigation. A black car pulls up, and the video shows eventually a man get out, appearing to walk toward the SUV. You see there the video shows the agent get out of the SUV. You saw the white flash, which is apparently when the agent shoots 20-year-old Trayvon Johnson, who then runs to his house across the street after he was shot in the stomach. Investigators say Trayvon pointed a gun at the agent. They believe possibly to carjack him. Now, as you saw, that video is too far away to determine if anything is in Trayvon's hand, but the DEA says that they did recover a firearm from the scene. His mother, we spoke to his family, she told us on Wednesday that he did not threaten that undercover agent.
The agent was in the car. Two individuals approached him, one brandishing a weapon, and the agent jumped out of the car and gunfire.
My son just got out the car, and the video will show is him running from him shooting at him. And they only gonna get his bullet casings because my son didn't shoot back.
And Trayvon's mother told me this afternoon the video proves that her son was not guilty of a crime, although she told me she couldn't say much more than that on the advice of the family's attorney.
So as you can see, the way that this case is being reported is very different from some of the state and local cases. They don't have a lot of information. They don't know the name of the agent. They don't know the race of the agent. They did say that the Cleveland police are investigating it, and that's partially true. So what I'm going to explain now is how the federal government investigates shootings by its agents and what the process is. I've been in shootings. I've also investigated shootings. One of the collateral duties of a supervisory agent in the field is to investigate all non-fatal shootings. So everything from a dog shoot to an accidental discharge to something else, we investigate that, and we have a shooting incident team that investigates other cases. So let's take a look at how the federal government proceeds when shots are fired during an enforcement situation. Unlike the police departments, nearly all of the enforcement actions taken by DEA are planned. There's an operational plan. For instance, it might be a buy bust, it might be a buy walk, it might be just a surveillance, it might be a search warrant or an arrest warrant. So, but typically when we go out, we have a sufficient number of officers or agents, and we're prepared. So it's a very different situation than what the police have to face. But let's say that an enforcement agent or enforcement operation is taking place and a shooting occurs. What happens? Well, supervisors are given a post-shooting checklist, which I wish I still had, but I don't. But obviously the first thing you have to do is you eliminate the threat. And secondly, you treat and obtain medical assistance for anybody who's been shot or injured. Call the ambulance, call local law enforcement, secure the scene. You notify the chain of command, and the supervisory special agent who's second in the chain of command, usually the assistant special agent in charge, will respond to the scene. Now the next thing that you do is you identify which agents or officers who shot the shooters, and you remove them from the scene and have them go back to the DEA office. You keep the other agents at the scene, have them help secure the scene, but immediately remove the shooters from the scene. Okay. The next thing that you will do after that, obviously, when you get back to the office, this is after the local police are beginning to process the scene. If you're a supervisor, you're going to look at the officer who did the shooting or the agent who did the shooting, and again, assess whether they need medical assistance. If they've been hurt during the shooting, you're going to get them medical assistance. If they are emotionally traumatized, you're going to have to get them medical assistance. This takes precedence over anything else. Okay? If the officer agent does not require assistance, then the next thing you will do is you have to give them time to regain composure. You give them privacy, and if it's a number of agents, then they get separate rooms for privacy. You give them an opportunity to call their spouse, their clergy, and their personal attorney. And this is something that I recommend. It's not something the agency requires, but I recommend that all federal officers join the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, because if you're involved in a shooting, they will, first of all, give you a phone consult with a qualified attorney 24/7, 365 days a year. And of course, that conversation with the attorney is attorney-client privilege. So he's going to ask you, or she'll ask you what happened. You tell them what happened, and they'll say, possibly we're coming out to the scene. It'll take us a day or two. And they'll probably tell you, go ahead and speak with the United States attorney. I'll explain that in a moment. And they'll tell you whether you can go forward and give a statement. And this is very important that you speak to an attorney. Again, after a shooting, you're going to be in an agitated state. And the reason for that is adrenaline dump. Okay, you've been through a traumatic, life-threatening situation. You may have just taken a life. You're going to be traumatized. Okay, so it's a tough situation. So again, you give the agent time to regain composure. The agent is given time to regain composure. You do not try to question them during that time. Now, during that time, you will take custody as a supervisor of any weapons that were fired at the scene. You provide them with a receipt. And then you have a firearms officer immediately issue another weapon. We do not take the badge and creds of officers or agents who've been involved in shootings. Why? Because officers or agents who've been involved in shootings have said that the most traumatic thing that happened to them is that the weapon that they just used to save their life was taken from them. And then often in state and local cases, their badge and ID is stripped from them and they're put out the door on admin leave. And we don't do that. Okay. What we do know is that out of all the officers and agents involved, including myself, who've shot people or been involved in shootings, 1/3 will experience severe psychological trauma afterward. 1/3 will experience moderate trauma, and 1/3 won't have any effect at all. It just doesn't bother them for whatever reason. But we do take them, this is very important that we understand that, and that you provide as supportive an environment at this stage as you can. So a new weapon will be issued if it was your primary weapon, and you do not take the agent's badge or credentials. Okay. Now, after the agent has been cleared by his or her personal attorney, this is the next thing that's done. A call is made to the Department of Justice, usually the U.S. Attorney's Office Civil Division. And the conversation then ensues between the agent who did the shooting and the assistant U.S. attorney. And this is a attorney-client protected conversation. It cannot be used against the agent. No one else can listen in on it. The U.S. attorney, the Department of Justice, is the attorney, one of the attorneys for agents of the Department of Justice who are involved in deadly force situations. Now, the purpose of this conversation is to determine a legal issue that's known as scoping. Now, what in the world is that? Was the agent, not wash agent, but was the agent or officer acting within the scope of the employment as a federal agent or officer when the shooting took place? That's the purpose of this interview. Because if the officer or agent was found to be acting within the scope of his or her employment, this makes a huge difference in how the case is going to be handled, on the degree of cooperation with state and local agents, and what state and local agents can do in this case. Now, after you've spoken to the attorney, you're going to provide them with a synopsis. This is the Department of Justice attorney. Provide them with a synopsis, and they will tell you right on the spot, yes, you were within the scope of your employment. I've always been told I was, and everyone I know has been told that they were. What happens after this takes place is that a team of DEA supervisory special agents, if there's a loss of life or serious injury, and this is the same in every other agency, comes to the location of the shooting, and they conduct the investigation. They take sworn statements from all the non-shooters, and the person who will be interviewed last, or the people who will be interviewed last, will be the agents who fired their weapons. Now, if your shooting was found to be within the scope of your employment, that means you are immune from civil suit, and you're also immune from criminal prosecution in state court. So that cannot happen. Okay. Now, have there been circumstances where state prosecutors have filed criminal charges against federal agents anyway in highly charged political cases, such as what we have a lot of right now? And the answer is yes. I can cite several circumstances, but I'll cite two of them, which are relatively recent. The first of these is something that came out of the case against Randy Weaver, the Ruby Ridge incident. And again, both of these cases involve prosecutors who are on, I would call the wings of our political system, right or left wing. I call them wing nuts. But in that particular case, what happened was Randy Weaver was living up in a cabin up in northern Idaho, and started with an ATF case, and then there was a shootout with the Marshal Service, and then the HRT of the FBI came, and during the time the FBI was there, an FBI agent named Lon Horiuchi took a shot at Randy Weaver, missed, and hit Vicky Weaver, who's his wife, and killed her. So the people up there were so incensed, and the prosecutor was so incensed that Lon Horiuchi, the FBI agent, was indicted for murder. But the case was discharged to federal court, and Horiuchi was dismissed. It was discharged. There was no prosecution. He cannot be prosecuted because he's a federal agent, and the state cannot prosecute a federal officer who is engaged in the performance of his duties. Now, on the other end of the extreme, we're going to go from right-wing nuts to left-wing nuts. And in that case, somebody got so upset, they blew up the federal building in Oklahoma, okay? This is left-wing nuts, what we've got now, basically running a lot of our cities. This was a case involving an agent I know named Jude Tanella. And in 2002, Tanella was involved in a high-speed chase, a struggle with the suspect, in which the suspect was shot and killed. The Kings County prosecutor in New York City, Tanella's white, the deceased is black, insisted on indicting him. The federal court ruled that you can't indict him. It's not possible to indict him. He's a federal agent. He was in the performance of his duties, and if it's arguable, not that it was even necessarily a justified use of force, but if it's arguable that the use of force was justified, that a reasonable law enforcement officer could see that this was a justified use of force, there cannot be a state prosecution. Now, have there been cases where agents have been prosecuted? Yeah. There's one who I see almost every day, former FBI agent who murdered, or shot his wife. I won't say murdered, shot his wife. And it was a domestic dispute. He claims she came at him with a butcher knife. In that case, he was not found to be within the scope of his employment, and he was prosecuted twice before a jury, and they couldn't reach a verdict. The third time, the judge acquitted him during a bench trial. He was charged with manslaughter, but he was fired from the FBI. And there's currently a case involving a Pentagon police officer who shot someone who was trying to break into a car in Maryland, and of course, that is not covered. The only time a federal officer is covered if you're not performing your official duty, if you see a crime of violence taking place, federal law specifically allows you to intervene. But that's a very limited circumstance, and that was not the case there. So this guy's being prosecuted. So hopefully this has been useful and helpful. One takeaway is that the names of the agents are not released. Okay, the agents are protected, and so you don't really have to worry about partisan local politician, state attorneys or district attorneys coming after you, as you're seeing happen in police departments and in major cities throughout the country. Okay, because we have a different protocol. You can't be prosecuted in state court. The states cannot prosecute the federal government. It doesn't work, okay? It's called the Supremacy Clause. What I will try to do is include attachments in the comments section. If you want to read the legal opinions, if you have nothing better to do, go to it. But hopefully it's been a bit useful and interesting. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Thank you.